have a slightly diminished meeting for this occasion. Perhaps. Tēnā tātou katoa, we seek wisdom, understanding, insights into the views and circumstances of others, strength to seek what we believe in, humility to accept the combined decisions of others, patience, good humour at all times, tolerance and courtesy while working in the best interests of our community. We come first, councillors, to apologies. I've received apologies from councillors Bartley, Philippina, Simpson and Darby for absence. I've had an indication that Councillor Casey needs to leave by 2 p.m, medical reasons. Are there any other apologies? If not, I'll move that we accept those apologies. Do I have a seconder for that? Councillor Hills. All those in favour, please say aye. To the contrary, no. Declare it carried. Item number 3, declaration of interest. Is there any councillor that needs to declare an interest on any item that's before us today? If not, we move to confirmation of minutes. I have 2 sets of minutes for confirmation. The ordinary meeting of the 30th of May and the extraordinary meeting of the 20th of June. I'll move accordingly, seconded by Councillor Cooper. All those in favour, please say aye. To the contrary, no. Carried. Petitions, none. Public input, none. Local board input, none. Under extraordinary business, I just want to move a minor matter of, raise a minor matter of extraordinary business. It's just to give councillors an update on the freedom camping bylaw, which you'll note is not on the agenda today, but I thought appropriate that I bring councillors, all councillors, up to date with what is happening in that sphere. So perhaps if we, having given notice of that, we move directly to consideration of extraordinary business before we get into the rest of the agenda. In relation to the work that's being done, and I want to acknowledge councillors Cooper and Holz for the hard work they've done on the hearing panel. I've come to the conclusion, after consultation with the 2 councillors, that that paper is not yet ready to come back in its current form to this committee, and I want to explain why. I've had the chance to have had some discussion with various councillors around the table, with local boards, and also with the wider community. I've also been advised by the legal and policy sections of our council that there has been received a letter from up north, I think from the Omaha Residents Association, that legal action would be taken if we were to proceed with it. And I'm still awaiting, and Councillor Cooper is still awaiting the final report back from legal in that regard. But it seems from the discussions I've had that there is a growing consensus that more work needs to be done. And there are various concerns. One is a concern about the absence of a general rule. I know that the chair of the committee was in favour of having a general rule, and I think the deputy mayor, but that was voted out at Regs committee. It's since come to my attention that a number of those that voted against the general rule now consider that that was not the right thing to do, and that we need to put the general rule in, but that was not consulted on, and it needs to be consulted on before that can happen. Secondly, we've received a number of submissions that suggest that perhaps the area of prohibited and restricted camping needs to be widened beyond what was originally in the list, and some of those areas that would be subject to prohibition have also not been consulted on. So before we proceeded with passing a bylaw, further consultation would have to take place with the community, and we know that that takes a period of time. There is a third issue that has been raised with me, and that's the wider issue of appropriateness of freedom camping on urban reserves. And that, I think, is a live discussion at the moment, and I think we need to do further work on that. But it also occurred to me that the problem that we're facing is actually not a problem of our making. It's a problem that has arisen from the Freedom Camping Act of 2011. And the premise that that Act was passed on was that freedom camping should be allowed everywhere other than where it is expressly prohibited. And it seems to me, while I don't have any antagonism against people who responsibly camp as freedom campers, it seems to me that the law ought to have been phrased the other way around, that freedom camping is not allowed unless expressly provided for. And that seems to me, and many of the people that I've talked to, as a more intelligent approach. I think we would have to expressly provide areas for freedom camping, and we could do that. Maybe it's a dozen sites, I don't know. That's subject to further debate and discussion. What we like about the new Freedom Camping Act is that, of course, it allows us to enforce. And we have legacy bylaws in place, and my understanding from officers is that they have never been used. Why have they never been used? Because actually it costs some tens of thousands of dollars to take somebody to court for freedom camping, and by the time you get to court, the freedom camper is nowhere to be found, absolutely disappeared, and the maximum fine you'd probably expect for wrongfully freedom camping would be a couple of $100, the maximum. So you're spending tens of thousands of dollars for a penalty of a couple of $100, and you won't even get that because you won't be able to find the person that you've taken the court action against. So I've taken the liberty of writing to the relevant ministers, 3 ministers that were involved, that have responsibility in this area, and I'll circulate. I'm sorry, I thought I'd asked my office to circulate it already, but apparently it hasn't gone out yet. That letter asks them to reconsider whether they want to maintain the law in its present form, because that's a good starting position. I understand absolutely the constraints that the hearing panel operated under. They operated under the law, what the law required of them. What the law required of them is not what I believe the people of Auckland actually wanted. So we'll see what ministers come back in as a first step. If ministers aren't prepared to change the law, and they won't necessarily have a vested interest in preserving the law because that was passed by a former government, but if they do not change it, the legacy bylaws go out of effect, I think, Councillor Cooper, in October next year. Yeah. Then we will have to go back and we will have to have a process of consultation at the very least, which will involve consideration of a general rule and consideration of a wider set of prohibited areas. So the first step, I think, is to await what the response from ministers will be, and then the second step will be to put in place a process where there is further consultation, both with a wider set of prohibitions and the general rule in place. So I just thought it would be useful for councillors to understand why that issue is not on the agenda today. So I'm giving as full an explanation as I'm capable of. Councillor Cooper, is there anything that you'd want to add to that?
Yeah, I guess I think there is some talk, people are saying abandoning this, but the reality is you can't ignore nearly 3,000 submissions. It's bad faith, but it's also you can't abandon a process, because if we start abandoning processes, we end up with an anarchy. And so we will have to go forward and make some recommendations, but we'll hold it at that point when we've made our recommendations after we've heard legal advice. So the worst scenario is we have nothing over this Christmas, which is a shame, but the legacy bylaws will still be in place. As we said, there'll be no ability to ticket anything. And so that's my disappointment about this, Mr Mayor, is that because we didn't have a general rule, our promise to the community that we would have something in place where we could fine people won't be in place. So, and also just an answer to people that say it's been a debacle and that it's been a bad process. Actually, It was a democratic vote that got us here. There was nothing wrong with the process, and the independent legal person who's looking at this process has said that our process has been fine. It's just that now we're left, when we have a general rule, that gets us, without a general rule, that gets us in a pickle, because we wouldn't have anything to replace the public places bylaw from the legacy councils.
Yeah.
But otherwise, I think this is the best way forward, Mr Mayor.
Thank you very much, Councillor. And again, thank you to the hard work that you and Councillor Hulse have put into that.
Mention Tau Henare, he was part of the panel.
And Tau Henare is part of the panel from the IMSB as well. I think, what will happen if we make no change at this stage, the legacy bylaws stay in place. We know
October next year.
Until October next year.
So we have to have something.
So we have a time frame that we have to operate to, but I think the very first thing, maybe I should have done it earlier, is to raise with ministers the appropriateness of the legislation, because the feedback I've had from around Auckland, and I think you had on the panel, was you might have to do this, but we don't think the law is right. Deputy Mayor, you wanted to make a quick comment on this?
Very quick, and that's, Mr Mayor, concerning local government New Zealand in general. This is not just an Auckland problem. It's a problem that's exacerbated on the East Coast, in the West Coast, the South Island. It's a problem in Queenstown. It's a problem in Southland. So I imagine it's a topic that's going to have to come up between the executive of LGNZ at conference to get a concerted approach to the Crown to get some legislative changes.
Yeah, I think that's a good suggestion. I think next week when we go down to the LGNZ, we can have discussion with some of the other councils, because I know the view that we're holding on this issue and on the legislation is not unique to Auckland. I think it's shared by a lot of other areas. Councillor Watson.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and I'm very pleased to hear that you are writing that letter, because during the Regulatory Committee that was a point that was stressed on a number of occasions by councillors, that rather than trying to make this work, that we should be approaching government and lobbying, especially given the strength of feeling not just in Auckland but around the country as a whole. So that's good. What's also good is to hear that the number of sites for potential prohibition or restriction is also being increased, because again there was a vote on that in the Regulatory Committee too that was voted down for additional sites. So I think that's certainly responding to the to the overwhelming view of the submissions. Just one question I want to clarify though, in terms of the general rule and consultation, and I assume there's been legal advice on this, given that comments have been made on the general rule, and one would assume that if you go out with something saying you want something and people say no they don't, or they want something that's different from that thing you've proposed, that's part of the consultation. So what I mean, might not be, you might not have it at hand at the moment, but what was the legal view then in terms of fulfilling your consultative obligations?
Mr Chair, can we get our legal people to answer that?
Yeah, I'm happy. Do we have our legal people here for that? Dani, let me have a go at it, and Dani will correct me if I'm wrong. The first was the advice given by our legal section is that to the Regulatory Committee was that we should put the general rule in, but a majority of councillors voted against that. The advice that I have is that you cannot put the general rule in at this stage unless there is further consultation. And then the consultation, different issues will arise. I know that there are some councillors that worried about the general rule for very genuine reasons, that it might be just used as a tool against homelessness, and there is no intention that it should be used for that purpose. This is about freedom camping, and this is about the appropriateness of not having anything that says that on an ordinary residential street people could camp indefinitely, and I think everybody understands that we need to have a rule to that effect. Dani, if you're happy with that advice, there's nothing you'd want to add to that? So hopefully, there will be further discussion about the form of it, but I think the general rule, as it, Councillor Cooper, I'm looking at you, as it used to apply, would be... I think just in terms of clarifying
that advice is that if something isn't in a statement of proposal and it goes out, you cannot adopt it, it has to be in the statement of proposal. The general rule wasn't there, so that's the clarity.
Yep.
So that's why then you'd have to go fully out to consult. You can't just email the people that submitted
Yep.
because that's not full consultation.
That was explicit advice that we got, councillor.
And just to check, then that general rule as originally proposed would allow for 2 days, would it? Two nights.
That's my understanding as to how
Okay.
the general rule has operated in the past.
So
Is
it
that
wouldn't
correct?
it wouldn't prohibit the camping. It would just restrict the time.
It would restrict it to 2 days because I guess from time to time you might have a friend that's come up from down south. They say, can we just camp outside your place and use your facilities?
Yeah.
And, we don't want to be unreasonable in that situation, but nor do we want people saying, I can go anywhere and hang out there for weeks at a time. So, Daney, since you've made the walk, I should ask you to comment further on that.
Thank you, through the chair. Just to clarify, what will happen from here is there will be advice given to the hearings panel. The hearings panel will then, and the hearings panel will make its decision as to what recommendation it brings back to the governing body. You will have an opportunity then to decide whether to go out with a statement of proposal, including a general rule, and exactly what that general rule might look like. So that will come back to you.
So, sorry, Mr. Mayor, just one final question. So, at that opportunity, there'll be the ability to revisit the general rule, even in terms of how it existed in terms of 2 nights stay.
Through the chair, yes. We actually are looking very closely now at the concept of the general rule, and we'll be providing advice to the hearings panel, which will make its way through to the governing body as to the appropriate form of the general rule, whether it, from a legal point of view, of course, there are other considerations, but whether it's as it was put up before by policy, or whether it is some variation of that.
So thank you, Mr. Mayor, because I think what you've quite rightly signalled is that there are a number of issues that have become very clear through this process, so it has at least served that function of letting us know what people are thinking. So I think that's a very good way to proceed.
Yeah. Thank you very much for that. And just to advise, maybe last comment, Councillor Walker.
Just have a comment that goes to the freedom camping bylaw, and it applies to some other bylaws as well, but regarding the issue of freedom camping, it's not simply the bylaw, it's enforcement, it's the budget for enforcement, it's the locations around the region that we could put in place for freedom campers, together with toilet and showering facilities. And what I'm suggesting, Mr. Mayor, is really the need for a comprehensive report around freedom camping generally that's over and above just the bylaw, because the bylaw deals with a problem but doesn't really provide a solution.
Thank you. Right. Just to advise councillors, you'll have in your email box at the moment the letter that I've written to. It's addressed to Ministers Kelvin Davis, Nanaia Mahuta and Eugenie Sage. There's a copy there if anybody wants to have further discussion around that. I'm very happy to do so. Right, we'll now move to the next item on the agenda, which is item number 9, which is recommendations from the Appointments, Performance Review and Value for Money Committee. And if I can ask Ross Churnside and Kevin Ramsey to come to the table, please. This is a paper I'll move formally. Have I got somebody from that committee that wants to second? The Deputy Mayor seconded. It's to consider the review that's been done on our finance section, and it's particularly to look at ways in which we can provide further saving and streamlining of the process. And I think the advantage of what's being proposed is that, for example, just in terms of the third recommendation, or fourth recommendation, one of the recommendations, by streamlining the process, there's a potential $18 million worth of savings within the 10-year period. So this would give the Chief Executive the chance to work with other Chief Executives of our of our CCOs to make sure we can achieve the greater efficiency and the greater savings that are possible in this area. But Ross, you might like to speak in more detail to the paper. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. And I'll just give councillors just a brief overview of the paper. I mean, this is the 8th value for money review that we have completed of the finance function. We found that, finance is there's a number of positive elements for finance and finance management for the council. We've got a clear financial strategy to move to a sustainable financial position in the long-term plan. We have, good practices in place to maintain our credit rating and maintain borrowing at prudent levels. We've got a step change in the capital expenditure in the long-term plan, and there's, an increasing role for finance to be able to support the council and both the council laws, but also the service delivery of that. Overall, finance costs are reasonable when we compare to benchmark, but there are opportunities for efficiencies, which the Mayor just highlighted one of those. We see good examples of shared services in finance, with collaboration occurring across the group on a number of matters. There is both transactional shared services provided to regional facilities, ATID and Panuku, but also in other aspects such as tax management, accounting, span the group, and we take a group practice treasury across the group. When we look at the roles of finance, generally they're effective, and there's been no significant internal control issues remaining outstanding from either Audit New Zealand or our internal audit. New technologies are starting to be used in finance, and a good example, say for Auckland Council, by applying robotics, automatic processing technologies, we're able to reduce the transaction costs for things like accounts payable. The review had three main recommendations. The first one was actually building on the shared services that are in place across the group, actually working at what a future roadmap or strategy could be to expand that. The second recommendation was around actually how do we manage financial information across the group. What we saw while doing the review, there was examples of duplication, people being asked for the same information twice, and actually there's an opportunity to get more efficient and effective in joining up there. And the last recommendation is around, improving the planning and reporting process. To simplify and streamline that. Councillors will have seen the quarterly reporting has changed. That's one step, but also the internal reporting. There's a programme of work has actually already been established around that, and we're well on the way to achieve those savings that are forecast in the report. But happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Ross, and once again, thank you for the team. I think the team has done incredibly good work, and probably it's not widely understood among the public that between value for money, which will look at saving maybe up to $500 million in the 10 years, and other efficiency savings, this council will have collectively saved $1 billion through that period, and that is an important sum of money that then becomes available for use in things that we around this table would regard as priority in spending. Interestingly, I did put a statement out the other day that in the last year we've saved $5.3 million on cutting our use of utilities like power and water, and it was disappointing that got no publicity when discussion about somebody who was advocating, I forget what they call the term, ambassador for Auckland, costing $12,000 got headlines. So $5.3 million in savings, nothing. $12,000 on somebody advocating for Auckland was an issue, but that's the world we live in. Right, any questions? Councillor Casey.
Ross, it's just a question about the use of a phrase in here. I'm looking at the group financial information strategy where we have one point of contact for all requests for financial information. It's the single source of truth as a statement. Truth in financial terms means accuracy.
Yeah. Through the chair. Well, yes. Effectively, what is meant by that is that we have one version of the information. So everyone accesses that one same version. So actually, everyone's working off the same fact base. What happens with some of the group information we receive, we bring stuff together in multiple times, and we can have multiple copies of information that can be modified or amended, and it's just actually being very clear on what is your single version of truth. This is not through the accounting ledger. This is more information that we pull in to do planning in particular.
So who would be the gatekeeper of that single source of truth?
That's still to be determined.
In
But
the
yeah, as you
development of
work your way through that, yeah.
Thank you.
Right, question, Councillor Wayne Walker.
Sure. I can see the merit of the review, and obviously there's an emphasis on finance, and I quote here. It states, finance is the performance monitor for the group and needs to keep current with changing expectations, digitisation and external standards. And I understand where that's coming from. I guess my concern is that I would hope that we have other reviews that go to the Council's ability to reduce carbon and also meet its social, environmental and cultural requirements. And that similarly, we have performance evaluations and measures of effectiveness and the like across those. And they may sometimes be at odds with issues around finance. And I'm certainly mindful across the group that I see matters being addressed from a financial perspective that do not meet environmental, social, recreational and environmental performances on the part of council, and that those areas are suffering. So I just put that there, Mr Mayor. We need to be able to take a comprehensive approach and not just do things on a cost basis.
Yeah, it's perhaps worth reminding everybody that the Value for Money Committee is not looking simply at making financial savings. It's looking at cutting unnecessary costs such as duplication. And when we cut unnecessary costs, that doesn't mean that we spend less. It just means that we direct the money towards spending in areas where we're achieving better things for our community. So this is absolutely consistent, for example, with your desire and my desire that we invest more in reducing our carbon footprint, because the money that we free up in an area where we're spending it on duplication, we can actually spend it on something that has a net positive effect for this council and our community. I think that's the important point to make. Right, if there's no other questions, it's a chance for comments. Councillor Lee, I'm sorry.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. In regard to the $43 million a year in group annual expenditure for audit and risk management services, would it be possible to get a breakdown of where that $43 million per year is going?
0.3. So I'm confused by that.
Audit and risk. Listen to audit. That's the right port.
Through the chair, I'm just confused by the question referring to audit and risk. Sorry. Is that in terms of the cost of the finance function, or is it the audit fees, which are about 4.3 million?
Where is the 43 million going? Who's getting it? You know, what entity is being paid the 43 million every year? Or obviously entities.
If I can just answer through the chair. I haven't got that in front of me, the number you're referring to, but that sounds right for across the entire group, for all of the audits undertaken, for annual reports, for long-term plans, for any amendments, any other reviews undertaken for stock exchange requirements across the entire group, would be that over a 10-year period.
Got some key facts, and all I want to know is what's behind that particular key fact. So I would request a breakdown, if we could, how that money is being dispersed. It's a lot of money.
Yes.
Second question, you've got borrowing increasing to 13.1 billion in 2028, but you've got here 8.8 billion as a key fact. Now, at the last report I had from finance was, I think, in probably March, and it went back to December 2018, and it said that our borrowings were 8.285 billion, and that there was another 63 million being borrowed. So that would bring it up to 8.348 billionaires a couple of months or so ago, but now I see it's gone up another $500 million. You don't have to answer it now, but could I have a breakdown of the borrowing that takes us from 8.285 billion as last reported up to the 8.8 billion?
Yep, through the chair, we can provide you the detailed breakdown. If you do remember, we had a previous question for you on this, and part of it comes down to timing. 30 June each year, the debt tends to be higher before we actually get the major rate intake coming through in July into August. So the debt levels come down significantly during July, August. But we can confirm exactly what that number is and what that point in time was for you.
I think it's absolutely important for the council, and I imagine moving into the next period, there'll be lots of questions and statements flying around about how much the council has borrowed and how much interest we're paying every day or every year or whatever. But I think it's important that there is consistency in those figures. I'm just worried about a $500 million difference. Maybe easily explicable, but it'll be good to get that explanation. Thank you.
Right, if there are no further comments or questions on this, the recommendations have been moved and seconded. I'll put the recommendations. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. Declare that carried. Thank you very much again, both of you, for the work that you've done in this area. Item number 10 is a noting paper. I'll move it accordingly. Have a seconder from someone. Councillor Sayers. Just dealing with the forward work programme and the annual budget workshop minutes. All those in favour, please say aye. To the contrary, no. Carried. Item number 11 is a summary of confidential decisions and related information that can now be released, and this pertains to the Civic Administration Building and the minutes from way back in March 2016. So I'll move that we note this. Can I have a seconder for that? Thank you. Councillor Sayers again. All those in favour, please say aye. To the contrary, no. Carried. I'll now move. We've reached the end of our open agenda. We have one item under confidential, and this needs to be kept under confidential because it contains sensitive information which would compromise City Rail Link's negotiating position until what we're about to confirm is finalised. So I will move that the public should be excluded. Seconder, Deputy Mayor Cashmore. All those in favour, please say aye. To the contrary, no. Carried. And while the room is being cleared, if I can invite to the front table, I've got Claire Gomez, Barry Potter, Kevin Ramsey, Fleur Aldridge,